welcome to In the News for March the 3rd, 2023. I am Brett Burney from appsandlaw.com.
And this is Jeff Richardson from iPhone JD. Hey, Brett.
I am, good morning, Jeff. I am hailing from the lovely city of Chicago today. I am here.
The windy city.
The windy, and it's definitely windy, and maybe even snowing a little bit later today. But the reason I'm here, just quickly, because this goes back, I think, to the relationship between you and myself, that I am here for a conference. And now this is a very specific conference for technology and the legal profession. It's called the ABA TECHSHOW, the American Bar Association. But it's something I'm very fond of, Jeff, because I have many wonderful memories of speaking with you on the panel. We used to do like 60 apps in 60 minutes. We used to talk about like how to use the iPhone or the iPad in your practice of law, or as a profession. And it's just been a lot of fun. I know you're not here. You're at home in New Orleans, but in Chicago. And I just have to say quickly, I want to say thank you to all of the folks that have come up to me here at the Tech Show. We've got a lot of people that just know both of us, Jeff, and they listen to the podcast and they just say how much they appreciate it, how much they enjoy us talking about it. And that's what really makes it worthwhile, right? I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's come up and talked to us about it. I wish Jeff was here with me. So
I wish I
pal
could
around. I know, but it's a lot of fun.
I have a case going to trial on Monday, so I just could not commit to being in Chicago this weekend. But regardless, I'll be there again in the future. No question. It's great.
Absolutely.
I love Tech Show. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I have to tell you, one of the things that I wish I had known about, because I'm doing some tips and some other presentations today, was this really kind of a scary video that I saw was being pushed around from none other than Joanna Stern. And she's talking about how, we always get nervous about people hacking into our phones, right? But in so many cases, sometimes that our passwords are compromised, not because there's somebody sitting, in a dark basement, like in a different country of some kind, but because they just watch you type in your passcode. This was a really scary story that I saw. You had a great post on it this past week as well from about the Wall Street Journal story, and then this video that comes along with it. Some really great tips on here too, just to make sure that you're protecting your iPhone passcode, because if you lose it, boy, it could be pretty bad.
Yeah, I tell you what, I hope that this is not the first time that people listening to the podcast have heard about this, whether they've seen one of the news stories or saw the post. I heard somebody refer to them as shoulder surfers, but there were two things that were really interesting to me about this story. One is that the idea that criminals, not just, all around the country, because Joanna had interviewed, police officers from different places.
Yeah.
I mean, this is definitely, but then additionally, now that the story's out there, more bad guys are going to learn about this trick. The idea of the trick is basically one person that's talking to you does something to convince you to put your iPhone in the mode where you have to enter your passcode. And I'll come back to that in a second. But then somebody else is, over your shoulder. Maybe they've got a video camera that they're sort of zooming in on you so that they can see you put in your passcode, because the key is stealing your iPhone's no fun. Nobody wants that to happen. But stealing your iPhone with your passcode is really, really bad. And I have to admit, I didn't even put together all the connections. And just to talk on those two areas a little bit more deeply, on the first one, there's a number of tricks that these bad guys are using, but the one that jumped out at me, because it's something that you see all the time, is, you're talking, you're being social, maybe you're in a bar or in a restaurant, and someone's like, okay, well, let me take your picture. Let me borrow your phone and take your picture. And the thing that's interesting about it is that when you're holding somebody's iPhone, like you're going to take a picture,
right?
Your fingers are in exactly the right position to hold down both the volume up button and the sleep wake button. And all you need to do is squeeze those two buttons. Nobody will notice you're doing it. Squeeze those two buttons for 2 seconds, and your iPhone goes into mode that says, do you want to shut down the iPhone? And then you just press the power button and it goes away. But what that does is it forces the iPhone that the next time that someone wants to use it, they can't use Face ID. They can't use Touch ID. They have to put their passcode in. So if someone has physical access to your phone in what seems like a very friendly, hey, let's take a picture.
Harmless, right.
So then you get the phone back. And of course, you want to take a look at the picture that they just took, or you want to look at your phone for some other reason. And they know that you're going to put your passcode in. So somebody looking over your shoulder could record what you type in, and then they just, steal your iPhone. Or I even saw one case where somebody said that he noticed the next day that he had a different iPhone in his pocket. Like somebody had, taken taken his iPhone and put a different one in there, probably just a dummy one. And so he didn't realize that his iPhone was even missing until when he went to go use it later on. And so once the bad guys, and this is the really alarming part, when they have your passcode, of course, it means they can unlock your iPhone and read your emails, and there could be all sorts of confidentiality concerns, which are horrible, but obvious. But additionally, currently, if you just have someone's iPhone passcode, you can tell the iPhone to reset the person's Apple ID. And the Apple ID is what protects all sorts of things, not the least of which is the Find My feature. So somebody could very quickly turn off Find My, so you no longer know where the criminal is. You can't track the criminals, which is what we always assume that you would do if your phone is stolen. But they could also, erase all your pictures. They could get into your services. There's a host of things that they can do. And if you have the built-in feature of saving website passwords, like your bank password, these criminals were sending $10,000. I mean, it is a parade of horribles that happens if the bad guys get both your phone and your passcode.
Well said.
So these articles and the video, like you said, it's a good video. That the video tells you the whole story. But I heard somebody afterwards was saying when they were reporting on this, that they said they remember, and I do too, Brett. I remember when ATM cards first came out. I want to say that was the 80s or something. I was in high school. The idea that you could use a simple card to get cash, first of all, seemed revolutionary. But second of all, when people would put in their ATM number, like, you would really protect that. You would know that, those 4 digits is the difference between somebody wiping out your bank account or subject to daily limits.
You protected
people would be super protective. Or also back in the day when we used to have these calling cards that you would use for like making, long distance phone calls at an airport, people would be super protective of those numbers too. The thing is, those are some old school things, but you need to think about your iPhone passcode in the same context. It is super, super, super secret. Do not let people see you enter it.
Yeah, just like the video, please, everyone, just go and watch. I think it's like an 8-minute video, and just like you said, Jeff, it tells the whole story, and it just it just makes it realistic. Just like you said, once they get the iPhone passcode, the first thing they immediately do is they go in and they change the iPhone passcode, right, to something that they want to use, right? And so right then, immediately, they could then use that new passcode that they created to unlock anything that they want to get into. And the video does this so well and just shows like immediately they can go in and say, I want to get access to the iCloud keychain. That's what you alluded to, right? In the sense that keychain then could have passcodes and passwords to their Chase bank account or their savings account. And it's just like in this video, the one lady that she was interviewing, one of the victims there, that they transferred money from the savings account to her checking account. And then that checking account was connected to Apple Pay. And so immediately the thief transferred money from Apple Pay from her account into their account, right? And because you can do that, it's very easy to do that. And as long as you have that iCloud password and then just anything else, she was locked out then of even being able to access her iCloud account from her Mac. She was talking about how she went back to her house and tried to access the Mac. I mean, wow, there's just so much that could get access to. Anyway, that story just scared the pants off of me, honestly. And it's just like but you did a great job in your article, quickly, by the way. And I thought you sort of just even reemphasized some of the tips that Joanna used in the video. So watch the entire video. And some of these I thought were just really great, like changing. Well, here, I'll let you go into it. First of all, make sure you keep it private. Like, don't let anybody know that passcode, similar to what you were just saying with the ATM card and everything. But consider a more complex passcode. And then you even, the things that you and I talk about all the time is using a third-party password manager instead of the actual iCloud keychain.
Can I talk about that one for just one quick second, Brett? Because I've heard some people say, well, your password manager, like if you use 1Password, for example, it also uses Face ID. And I was actually listening to a podcast the other day by John Gruber called The TECHSHOW, and he was saying, oh, well, therefore, the criminals could also because if you put in Face ID and it doesn't recognize your face as a backup, it lets you enter in your iPhone passcode. So he's like, so therefore the bad guys could get access to 1Password. No, that's actually not true, because a lot of third-party apps, if they're done correctly, and I noticed before our podcast today, 1Password does it correctly. American Express, my American Express app does it correctly. My Chase bank, banks. They will allow you to use to use Touch ID or Face ID to bypass entering in your passcode. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't then say enter your iPhone passcode. Instead, it then says enter like the specific password for American Express or
That's right.
your specific one password. And the reason I mentioned that is that, of course, if a criminal was able to take advantage of you, you'd be in a world of hurt. But one thing that you would not have to worry about, hopefully, is them getting into your password manager. So if you have your bank website password stored there, if you have secure information and a secure note, that would still be protected, and the bad guys would not be able to get into that. And you know, I think that putting things in a password manager, you know, confidential little notes, things, you know, tidbits of information that only you need to know about, but you want to help remember them. I really think it's much better to put them in a password manager app than to put it in the regular notes app anyway, because you never know, even if it's not nefarious. I mean, it could be like a friend using your iPhone for a second. You just don't want something popping up, you know, there. So, so that's one tip I would emphasize is, we say that there's a million reasons to use a password manager, but here's one more reason to use a password manager. So,
well, this is an important one though, because Jeff, I know you've heard the same thing. People will tell me, well, I don't need to use 1Password. It's like now Apple has all of that built in with the iCloud keychain. And I get it. I know it's already built in. It's there. You don't have to pay for something extra. I understand all of that. But I thought the way you wrote about this in your article was really good. Like, that convinced me, like, well, yeah. You know, having like that additional level of security. And you linked quickly, also, by the way, PC World picks Dashlane as the best password manager around. You also mentioned the Wirecutter. They talk about both Dashlane and 1Password. I think they like 1Password a little bit better, just like we do. And of course, a lot of people have been using LastPass, but we've talked about the LastPass breach, which I think there was another story this past week, right? It just continues to get a little worse and worse
for LastPass, yeah.
And so I cannot recommend LastPass right now. So if you're using that, I would certainly get out of that if you can and use it. But anyway, okay, we can move on. But it's definitely, thanks for linking to that video, Jeff, because I had seen other people talk about it and I hadn't had a chance to watch it, but man, watching that just really drives it home. And that's important. So you mentioned you were in high school once upon a time, and this was so fun to read this little story here, your introduction to your post today. There was a story that's been floating around the interwebs of Steve Jobs in all places in New Orleans. And it's such a nice picture. I think, if I understand this right, there's like a Steve Jobs archive, right? And they're continuing to start to release, you know, some pictures and other things like that of the history of Steve Jobs' life. But this picture just caught, I think so many people just thought it was so precious because he's like peering into a window because he saw somebody using like one of the first Macs. I mean, this is 1984, right? And he just is like observing this lady who has no idea that Steve Jobs is standing outside the window watching her in a store here or a bake or something. I'm not even sure where it is. And he's just like watching to see how like a real life person is using the Mac. And this was just really cool. But it was in New Orleans. And I loved how you just did a little bit of investigative work. Why was Steve Jobs in New Orleans in the first place? You found out there was some kind of a conference going on back then, right? That he was there. And it was like, I don't know, how many blocks away from your high school when you were in high school, Jeff? It's just really cool. Thanks for posting that today.
And for folks, you know, I'm not going to say more than I definitely click on the link to that story that Brett just referenced because it's got a little twist in it at the end that you don't see coming, and it's a fun story. So I don't want to ruin the story to say more than that, but take 5 minutes to click on the links and read the story because it's really funny.
Absolutely. And speaking of New Orleans, quickly, I also love the fact we mentioned David Sparks, or his name has come up since I've been here at the Tech Show, but he was very kind to ask me a couple of weeks ago, just like you've been featured on his MacSparky home screens before, Jeff, and I liked your home screen post. So David was very kind to ask me, and it posted, and you were nice to point to it. It's just neat to be able to, you know, I'm always curious to see what other people are doing on their iPhone home screen. And so I love how David has always done this. And speaking of which, I had a picture. When we were in New Orleans, you know, we were there at the beginning of the first week of January. And so we're walking around New Orleans. My daughter was just taking really fantastic pictures down in the French Quarter and everything. And one of them I thought was so nice that I used that as my home screen. But it's like New Orleans everywhere. I love it. It's like it just keeps on going.
Everywhere you go. This series of posts that David does, like you say, I mean, I encourage folks to read the one about what you do with your own home screen, but I actually enjoy this series because, like you say, it's a little, if you just look at this series of posts on his website that he's been doing for years and years, when you see the other apps that people consider important enough to put them right there on the home screen, it really helps to help. Yeah, it helps you to discover new apps. And I also enjoy looking at the different ways that different people have things laid out in their screen because that sort of makes you think
with
about
widgets, right?
With widgets
right.
and everything else. So it's a great column that he's been doing for years and years. I love it.
Hey, there you are.
Yeah. So.
And you did the iPad too. I love it how too, like David always spends like, sends very specific questions on like what you do, but everybody just kind of like, goes up and say, oh, but I'm excited about using this too. And I do it this way. Anyway, just a lot of fun. Thanks for linking to that as well. Well, one of the things I know we've talked about a while back is how I almost had to say the word Twitter, Jeff, because I feel like it's like so politicized now and everybody has their own opinion. But we're setting all of the politics aside, because one of the things that you and I come at this is using third-party Twitter apps. And you and I both, I know, like Tweetbot was one of the ones that we liked quite a bit. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, when for a variety of reasons. But it was a few months ago, I believe, that Twitter decided that they were not going to allow any other third-party Twitter apps to be used anymore. They did not give them access to the Twitter feed, I guess, or the API, if you really want to get technical on all of that. And so there were several of these third-party Twitter apps. Tweetbot was one of them. Twitterrific was another one that all of a sudden just stopped working. Like all of a sudden, these developers had no way to access all of the information that people were using. And several folks like myself and you, I believe, were subscribing to Tweetbot. And I'm so glad that you linked to this story from John Voorhees today at Mac Stories about, hey, if you want, you are due to get a refund because the app is not working anymore. But John just makes, I think, a fantastic case. I believe he's a lawyer, right? He makes a fantastic case of, hey, you know what? Maybe you could just decline that refund. And I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, it's even more interesting because this is something new that Apple created. I mean, there had never before been a system where Apple had created a mechanism for a developer who has already collected money from you and whose app has had to shut down. Apple has never before had a system in place where they could do anything but give you a refund because the app wasn't working anymore. But they worked with the developers because these are indie developers. There's just, a couple independent folks that make these
apps.
That, it's going to be a big financial hit to them if they collected money from you 6 months ago and they've spent that money and then suddenly they're told, oh no, now they need to dig into their pockets and give it back.
Right.
And again, for each individual person, I mean, the descriptions to these things were like less than $10. It's not a lot of money for an individual person, but if you have 1 million users and suddenly you need to come up with $7 million to give people the money back, that can really add up. So I encourage folks, if you did have an active subscription to either Twitterrific or Tweetbot, and if you open up the app now, because you would otherwise have no reason to open up
I have it open right now.
It doesn't work anymore.
Right.
If you open up the app, they just updated the apps this week to now have something pop up saying, thank you for your support.
Oh, this is so great.
If you want your money back, great, do nothing. But if you want to click this button, then you don't have to. And in fact, the maker of Tweetbot pointed out that a third option is instead of letting me keep your money, I will transfer your money towards an account for the app that they have for their Mastodon client.
Yeah, Ivory is the app. Yeah,
so
exactly.
You can do that too. But and I actually use Ivory. It's a nice app for Mastodon. I think I mentioned it here in the podcast recently.
You did.
So
yes.
So anyway, it's an interesting situation. When else are you going to have a situation where a developer in good faith has issued a subscription to you and then suddenly it no longer works?
I thought this was just brilliant the way they did. They explain everything. Here, I've got the app open, the Tweetbot app, and sure enough, it says you had 270 days left in your subscription when Twitter blocked access. You have 26 days to choose an option. And like you said, number one is I can transfer my remaining subscription time from Tweetbot to Ivory because Tweetbot obviously isn't working anymore. And you can say, I don't need a refund. You can click that button. And then you can say, if you want a refund for the remaining subscription time, simply do nothing. We will automatically refund you through Apple. So in other words, that's the default because that's the way that Apple, the App Store works. But I loved how you linked to the story from John Voorhees that I'm going to go and proactively probably transfer my subscription over to Ivory because like you said, it's a beautiful app and they're working very hard on it. I know as well. But that's good. Okay, so if you subscribe to Twitterrific or Tweetbot, maybe just consider that this isn't the refund that you're looking for. So let's go from Twitter and leave that behind to iMessage. Now, I got to tell you, one of the things that I love about my text messages being in the Apple ecosystem, Jeff, and you're probably the same way, is that somebody can text me that it comes to initially my phone. And actually you can change like what phone number or email or, the default landing spot for text messages. But most of us just do our phone number, right? Well, that's great. And I love getting text messages on my phone. But the other thing about having an iPad and a Mac is that everything synchronizes. So in other words, if I want to reply to somebody and I want to type a little bit more than just, thumb typing on my phone, I'll just jump on my iPad or my computer and I'll type the response to that text message because it all synchronizes through iMessages. I love that. If you're a Windows user, as you well know, Jeff, at least at work, right? That doesn't happen if you've got a Windows computer. Except there was a couple of stories this past week that says, well, maybe it kind of works. In fact, you might be able to get synchronized to Windows, kind of, right? That's what I love the story here. iMessage is coming to Windows, kind of.
Yeah. And you started this story by saying, oh, well, Jeff, you must do it the same way. I actually don't. I wish I could access iMessage on my computers, but there's actually two reasons that I don't. Number one, at work, I use a Windows computer, which up until this story doesn't work. And even at home, although I do have an iMac that I use at home, because it's like the nicest computer in our house, it's the one that my son uses when he wants to play computer games all the time when I'm not working on it. And so I actually don't have messages turned on my home computer because if my son's in front of the computer, I don't want the messages popping up on there. So as a result, the only place that I get messages is on my iPhone or iPad or watch, and I don't get it on my computer. I would love to have it. And so if there actually was a way that I could get messages to work on the Windows computer that I'm talking to you on right now, I would absolutely do it. This solution, however, ain't it. And I appreciate what Microsoft is doing. It's got so many limitations. It doesn't allow you to use pictures. It doesn't allow videos. It doesn't allow attachments. And it doesn't allow you to see old conversations, only the new messages that have occurred while this app that they have is running.
Oh my goodness.
What's interesting to me is the whole reason it's running in the first place. It's really a hack. If you get a text message in the Messages app, there is a function that's been in the Messages app for a very long time that allows that message to be sent over Bluetooth to another device. And so, for example, way back when, there used to be a watch that people would use made by a company called Pebble. And there's other non-Apple Watch watches. And the way that those devices, whether it was a watch or something else, the way that those devices would be able to get your messages at all is just by taking advantage of this little API that allows messages to go over Bluetooth. It doesn't mean that they get to see all your old messages. It just means you could get a notification if a new message came in. And so Microsoft, on the one hand, was pretty clever to say, well, we can just pretend like we're one of those devices, and therefore we will be able to display notification when you get messages. And that's nice. I mean, I got to give them credit. The limitations of this, though, are pretty severe. Now, I will say this, even though this is not going to be a great product, I might actually still consider using it, because even if it's not going to work with pictures and videos and everything else, just being able to type on my computer might sometimes be more convenient. So, I do give Microsoft some credit, but at the same time, given the severe limitations that it has, and I think it's going to frustrate some people more than it makes them happy, I'm almost surprised. Like, this almost seems like something that a third party would release and say, if you're willing to live with the limitations, here's my little, shareware app that will do it. For Microsoft itself to release it, a little surprising, but we shall see. So.
Maybe it's a start, right? Maybe it'll get better. Although right now you only get gray bubbles. No green or blue bubbles. It's all gray bubbles if you wanted to try that. Well, report back to us. If you jump in and try it, Jeff, it would be interesting. How about some AirPods tips? Wow. This was a great long article. What is this? PC Magazine by Lance Whitney. Thank you for linking to this. I think I knew most of everything, but it's, as you and I have said many times on some of these, posts that we have, it's just great to be reminded. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't gone through and done my ear tip fit test in a while, or I haven't gone through the spatial audio settings and just to see that everything, is turned on the way that I want, or be able to customize the presses. But this was a great article on here. I like this. And obviously, if you have the AirPods Pro, second generation, there's a whole lot more options that you have as far as like how you can press, or the volume slider, or the noise transparency, or noise cancellation, that kind of a thing. Great stuff on here.
Yeah, great list of tips. One that that people often tell me they did not realize is you could change the name of your AirPods, and this is especially nice if you get a new pair. You might want to give it a different name so that you could just. So yeah, it's a great list to look through. Make sure that you know all these tips.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I'll link that in there as well. Good stuff all around on that. Well, every once in a while, people will ask me about a dock for the iPad, and I kind of think, I don't know if that's necessary. I mean, a lot of times today, I travel with like these USB-C hubs, right, where it plugs one in, and I've got a bunch of HDMI port and USB ports and that kind of stuff. And for me, having these USB hubs walking around is usually kind of fine. But I thought this was a great thing you linked to today. It's a company called Plugable, which I think that's a great name, but it's a docking station that I think this particular reviewer uses his iPad basically as a desktop computer. And so this particular dock, or this pluggable docking station, allows him to connect the iPad much easier to multiple monitors, for example, or kind of even use the iPad at a different angle. Good review on this.
Yeah, I've never heard of this company before. I've never tried this product before, but just by looking at the pictures in this review, I could totally see that for some people this would be a really good.
You want it?
What is it? $70 on Amazon. It's
Right.
an interesting looking. It looks like you could put your iPad into all sorts of different angles, and it's got all of the ports you might want. So I think for some people this might be exactly what they're looking for. It's a neat product.
And I use I just talked about the USB-C hub, but this would be not like, I usually use that if I'm going somewhere with the iPad,
Sure.
but having something like this maybe on the desk itself, and having, an external hard drive plugged in to the bottom of this dock, for example. And like you said, because typically when I get to my office, I will put out my MacBook Pro, and I've got multiple monitors, and then I have my iPad on the side, and being able just to set that in would be kind of neat as well. Smelly AirTags is the title that I have for this post. I saw this linked from a couple of places, and I'm glad that you picked up on it as well. We've talked about using AirTags for tracking your luggage. We've talked about using AirTags for tracking your dog. We've talked about AirTags in multiple different places, but I never thought about using AirTags for investigative journalism.
Exactly.
But that's exactly what Reuters did in this story. This was good.
Yeah. I mean, the story itself is that Dow was claiming that if you donated shoes, they would recycle the materials in it and turn it into playgrounds.
Right.
But it turned out that at least for the 11 shoes that Reuters had hidden an AirTag in, they did not get used and turned into playgrounds, but instead they ended up in third-party markets. And on the one hand, part of me is thinking, well, at least somebody is buying the shoes, so it's like the same thing used.
Right.
On the other hand, so from that standpoint, it's good. But the flip side of it is, you're telling people, give me your shoes for free, your old shoes. Give me your old shoes for free. If you told those people, hey, would you give me your old shoes for free, and then I'm going to go around and sell them, and somebody's going to be making money off of them.
Right.
People might be less willing to donate, or more willing to say, maybe I'm going to hold on to those shoes just in case I need them. I don't know. It's the underlying story is interesting. I'm not going to say too much more about it, but the way that this story was investigated by putting AirPods in the AirTags in there, to see where it ended up around the world, I just thought was fascinating.
Absolutely.
Like you say, Brett, I always think about using an AirTag to track my own stuff. I guess technically this is your own stuff too, is your own shoe.
Right.
But to use it in this sense was just really interesting. And, maybe people are going to have to start to think about the consequences of what they're doing if there could be hidden. And of course, it's interesting that they used AirTags, because as you and I know, the AirTag itself, it will beep and I'll let you know, it has alerts. There are cheaper Bluetooth trackers that you can find on Amazon that don't have any of the security features that an AirTag does, to be obvious. I'm almost surprised to use the AirTag. I think, if you were really trying to be undercover about this, there are some probably better solutions you could have found, but it was it was an interesting story.
I mean, it's a very thorough story. Like, I feel like I could have gotten the story maybe in 2 or 3 paragraphs, but wow, if you want to dig into it, I love the little video that accompanies. This is from Reuters, by the way, so obviously it's well respected and very thorough, as it's great that it is. Like I said, from an investigation standpoint, but I love he's like sitting at a conference table and he's got pliers and he's pulling out. I mean, they embedded the AirTags like under the heel, in the soft part of the heel of the shoe, just so that couldn't be found that easy or so. But I think if nothing else, it's just, there was a promise made, obviously by very large companies, like you said, Dow and several others, that we were going to transform these shoes. And it's like, okay, well, that's what I would love to donate my shoes for that purpose. And if it's not being used for that purpose, that's obviously what the goal of the story was, to find out like what's really being happening on this. But man, hey. If you could use an AirTag to do this, I think he had like 11 pairs that he tracked, right? And I think he was able to track them all, maybe for 2 or 3 pairs that somehow either just got lost or maybe, ultimately, if no one buys those shoes, I'm afraid they would still end up in a landfill. And that's, the other thing also that people were talking about. So good, interesting, very interesting stuff on there. Much better, I think, than a dog swallowing an AirTag. Like I'd rather read stories about AirTags like this than the other way around. In the know. So
in the know.
I'm at a conference, and as anybody probably knows, today at a conference, when you go buy booths or when you get business cards from folks, you're typically going to run into a lot of QR codes, right? Everybody wants you to say, hey, you can, instead of saying go to www.mycompany.com, it's like, well, just point your phone at this QR code and it'll take you right to the link, right? They're very convenient, and they've been around for many, many years, but I just, every time I go to a conference, I'm just reminded about it. There's a lot of people that use this kind of stuff. Well, it used to be that we had to have a third-party app. You remember this, Jeff, right?
Right.
Many years ago, we had to download it. There was dozens and dozens of third-party apps in the App Store, to scan a QR code, whatever it is. And I used to use those, and they were fine. Several years ago, Apple finally relented and just said, well, let's just build the QR code scanner in the camera app. And that's exactly what I find most people will do. Now, this is mostly on an iPhone only. Well, Android has been able to do this for a long time as well. You just open the camera app. You have to be in photo mode. Like, you can't be in video mode, I don't believe. You have to be in photo mode in order to do that. But you just point your camera app at a QR code. And typically what happens, once it recognizes it's a QR code, there's a little yellow button that will pop up on the very bottom of that, right? And that basically is like the link. Typically it sends you to a URL, a web link, but it could open up your email app if it's an email link of some kind, or, even be able to download something. I mean, by the way, just quickly on the security side, just make sure you trust the QR code, right? Okay, good. You're smiling, Jeff.
I was about to say the same thing. Yeah,
we've got friends that will typically say we don't ever recommend scanning a QR code. But if you're at a conference, I recognize the company, like I trust it, and I know. Just make sure that you trust it before you scan a QR code. Be that as it may, once you get into the trust factor of the QR code, you can just open the camera. If you don't see that little yellow button pop up, Jeff, in most recent versions today, there is a little, I call it the live text button in the little bottom right corner when you have have the camera open, especially if it recognizes their text. But I think that Apple calls it the code scanner. Anyway, there's a little button that will pop up in the very bottom. In fact, let me see if I've got another link here that'll just show what that looks like. It gives you some other options, like you can copy the link instead of visiting the link, for example, or you have a couple of other options if you tap that little button in the bottom of the camera there, which is fine as well. But here's the other thing that I didn't recognize. I typically just open the camera, I point it at the QR code, and it gives me the yellow button and it pops up. However, I didn't realize you could also add what Apple calls the code scanner to your control center. So if you go to Control Center in your settings app, and we've talked about this tip before, there are several options there that you can add to your control center, these little buttons that you can add to your control center. And one of them will be the quote code scanner, is what Apple calls it. And you just add that to your control center. So now instead of opening up the camera and pointing it at a QR code, you can go into Control Center. I just swipe down, like right above where the battery indicator is on the iPhone, pulls up the Control Center. All my buttons are there, and I can tap the code scanner button. And what that will do is it looks like the phone, the camera app, Jeff, but it's limited. It just has like 4 little white corners. You point it at the QR code, and the only thing there is there will be no button that pops up. It will immediately just do whatever that QR code tells you to do. It'll just jump you right to the Safari browser if that's your browser of choice or your default browser. It'll open up the Mail app if it's an email. And I just found that is a much less involved process than the camera app itself. It just is there for the QR code scanner. It obviously uses the camera app, but I've just found that to be a lot easier. So that's go into your settings, go to Control Center, add the code scanner to your buttons in the Control Center, and then you can just open the Control Center, tap that code scanner button, and then it'll just pull up that screen, basically the camera. You point it at the QR code, and then you're off to the races on that. So that's my tip for the day.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering why you could recommend it because I'm thinking, isn't it super easy to jump into the camera app a million different ways? But that is the difference: is the QR scanner will automatically launch the. Oh, I guess that makes some sense.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just stripped down. Like you don't have choices about video or photo, and what flavor it is. It's like it's just there for the purpose of that. And I just have found that to be a little bit of a quicker way to access it.
Yeah. My tip of the week this week is an oldie but a goodie. The other day I was helping somebody with their iPad, and as they were switching between two apps, and every time they did it, they would swipe up to get out of the current app, and then they would go down to the little thing at the bottom of the screen, find the other app and launch it, and then go back and do it again and back and do it again. And I finally said, there's a much, much, much faster way to switch between apps.
You couldn't help yourself, Jeff.
You could not help myself. I was just sitting there like, oh, it's like watching someone on a computer that's not using Command Tab or Control Tab to switch between apps.
Exactly.
I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a faster way to do this. And so the tip is there's actually two easy ways to do it. The one that I prefer to use, and you can turn this on or off to enable it, but I think it's turned on by default. If you put either 4 or 5 fingers on your iPad screen and you just swipe, just put your fingers on the left side of the screen, just move over to the right. It's like you're pushing away the current screen and going to the last one, and then do what you need in the app, and then do the exact same gesture, and it'll swipe back. That's the one that I use. There's another one that I actually don't use, but if you prefer this one, you could put your finger, just a single finger, at the very bottom of the screen, sort of, just below where the little taskbar is. It's just below there. If you swipe your finger along the super bottom of the screen, you can go between apps that way. But I prefer just using, in fact, I usually just use 5 fingers. I feel like I'm grabbing the screen and pulling it to the side. It's super fast. This tip's been around for a very long time. Yeah. If it's not something that you have baked into your just, inherent gestures, consider adding this. Yeah. Considering put this one in your muscle memory because it's so much faster.
I do that certainly if I'm holding the iPad, but I'll just quickly tell you, you mentioned the Alt tab for Windows and Command tab for Mac, Jeff. And I'm going to tell you, if I have my iPad sitting in my Magic Keyboard, I will do that same because all the time. Yeah, exactly. So Command tab on a keyboard with the iPad will work the same way. It'll switch between the open apps. And so I know they didn't mention that here because typically if I'm holding the iPad, or even sometimes if I have the keyboard, I will do the 4-finger, swipe left or right, that kind of a thing. But you can also use Command Tab on the keyboard if you have it connected to an iPad as well. Good stuff on excellent. Yeah, that's an oldie. That's a very goodie. It never gets old because it's such a great tip on that. Excellent. All right, my friend. Thank you again for getting together as we always do. We've got some other travel and some other plans that we'll see how it goes for the next couple of weeks on stuff. But we will endeavor, do our best to make sure that we continue to put out the episodes every Friday, Jeff. I always appreciate you being here. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll talk with you next week.
Have fun at Tech Show. See you, Brett. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks.